Barcelona just walked into the Santiago Bernabeu and dismantled Real Madrid 4-0. But the scoreline doesn't tell the full story, because it's how they did it that should terrify the rest of Europe. Let's break down how Flick outmaneuvered Ancelotti. The first warning signs came early. Real's press wasn't just imperfect, it was fundamentally flawed. Real Madrid were looking to press from their 4-4-2 mid-block, with Bellingham and Camavinga handling the wider regions, with Tchouaméni and Valverde playing as the more traditional central midfielders. In response to this, Barcelona were initially in somewhat of a back three, with Koundé tucking in, whilst Balde could afford to be more aggressive down the left-hand side. However, that shape did shift later on, as you'll see. And there was nothing inherently wrong with Real Madrid's pressing shape, hypothetically, but it was the way Ancelotti pressed with Vinicius that gave Real Madrid defensive nightmares. Vinicius would be pressing from out to in pretty much in a straight line, and this posed incredible problems for Real Madrid. What his line of pressure meant is that he never kept any Barcelona players in his cover shadow. Simply put, he never cut out any of the passing lanes during his approach, so the centre-back still had an easy pass into the midfield, as well as to Koundé if he wanted to. And this is the perfect example. Barcelona in their back three, and as the centre-back gets on the ball, Vinicius presses straight. So what exactly is the problem with this? Well, as you can see, it means that the centre-back still has options to get the ball into the midfield or to the fullback. So with one pass, Barcelona can take Vinicius and Mbappe out of the game easily. So this straight line pressing from Vinicius only served to exaggerate the 3 versus 2 disadvantage they had high up. Compare this to an alternative scenario which most of the best pressing teams use, which is the curved run on the press, where instead of approaching straight, Vinicius would press from this angle. And what this would mean is that Koundé would be in Vinicius's cover shadow this entire time, taking away one direct option from Barcelona, meaning that they only had the midfield to worry about. Another alternative that's even more common when teams press in a 4-4-2 is having a midfielder join the press rather than a winger. What this means is that the front two can choose to be more passive and both use their cover shadows on the midfield to decrease the impact of the 3 versus 2 in this region. Or, even if a man is pressing, they can still keep one of the pivots in their cover shadow, allowing the center to still be protected. So why was Real's pressing decision so devastating? Well, Barcelona's setup was almost tailor-made to exploit exactly these weaknesses in both the wide areas and the midfield, as now Barcelona had an advantage in the front line as well as in the center of the midfield. Real Madrid had to respond, and they would try and counter this disadvantage by playing with a hyper-compact 4-4-2, and having Bellingham and Camavinga so narrow would then mean that Valverde and Tchouaméni would be tasked with pressing the double pivot much more aggressively to try and stop Barcelona's build-up before it began. This wasn't enough though, because Koundé could still receive on the outside, and now Camavinga would be tasked with pressing him, and breaking up that compact narrow shape only served to increase the gap between the lines that Real Madrid were trying to prevent. And while Koundé could receive, the game was truly won and lost in the middle of the park. Pairing this ineffective front two press with Vinicius's angles and Mbappe not having much work rate at all, with trying to be aggressive in the middle whilst being at a numerical disadvantage, was disastrous. If a deeper Barcelona pivot was able to get onto the ball, even without much space, just enough space to play the pass, the number 10 would be able to receive between the lines constantly and now be running immediately at the back line with plenty of support ahead of him. Or if it wasn't a pivot, Kubasi's amazing ability to break the lines could still find that man in the 10 position. This was only made worse by the fact that Lewandowski was never stationary, and he too was willing to come deep, to also try and exploit that space between the lines. And if a centre-back did try and follow him, Lopez has a great movement, and he was quick to identify the gaps and look to make the most of them. So Real tried to be more aggressive and proactive by getting a centre-back to move on to the 10 early, and trusting the remaining centre-back to handle Lewandowski 1v1. However, this scenario is still not ideal, because 1v1 scenarios mean that one turn or one tricky maneuver and the midfielder is away from his marker, and the opposition can get into extremely dangerous positions. And we see this perfectly when Olmo was on the pitch, as he dragged Militao far out of position. One turn and he's running at the back line, and this eventually leads to a huge goal-scoring opportunity. Or here, where Rudiger is aggressive on Fermin Lopez, and Lewandowski also drops deep, but one bit of magic from Lewandowski allows Yamal to attack the space that's been vacated. The baffling thing about Real's defense is that it played into one of Barcelona's best tactics this season. With Real defending so narrow, Koundé, but more often Balde, could afford to be extremely aggressive on the build-up, looking to provide the width, and that would then allow Rafinha to move into a 10 position, so Real's problem of leaving space between the lines was now only worse as they had two 10s to deal with, so technically, they could actually be 3 versus 2 down at times, making it difficult to know who to pick up and who would be running in behind. And Lewandowski made them pay for this. A midfielder's on the ball and Tchouaméni and Valverde only pay attention to the Barca double pivot. But Rafinha has also come between the lines, so now he and Fermin Lopez are unmarked. Militao and Rudiger recognize this, but poor communication means that both of them push up, looking to press, whilst Vasquez is playing Lewandowski onside. So, like we saw Real Madrid try and counter the 3 versus 2 in midfield by defending narrow, they did the same in defense, with Vasquez and Mendy often coming in to assist the centre-backs, so that when a man pressed, they had more cover. This did leave the fullbacks in a lot of space, however, and Barcelona found Balde fairly often. This means that a lot was being asked from both Bellingham and Vasquez, as Bellingham was expected to be narrow to help this situation in the midfield, but also track back, while Vasquez had to worry about the secondary 10, whilst also worrying about Balde out wide. Because of Real Madrid being narrow, making it difficult for Bellingham to track, and Balde with this much time and space is able to find Lewandowski. In other words, this game was tactical perfection from Barcelona, except it wasn't. Looking at their XG, the pair were less than a goal apart. So what did Real do well, and what did Barcelona have to improve to push deep in the Champions League, as well as reclaim La Liga? Why did Ancelotti want Vinicius and Mbappe defending as a front two? Well, as the game went on, Barcelona were getting bolder and bolder with their fullbacks, and even Koundé would push high up, with Yamal also looking to cause that overload. But now, if there was a turnover, Vinicius had plenty of space behind the fullback to attack, and Real, as always, were quick to look to find him, isolated against the centre-back. Out of possession, Barcelona used their usual 4-2-4 pressing shape, with the wingers being expected to cover the centre-backs, and Lopez and Lewandowski covering the pivots. Barcelona were fine with leaving these wider regions unattended, because both Mendy and Vasquez aren't really threats on the ball, and Mendy in particular was tripping over his feet pretty much whenever he got it, even in space. With Barcelona playing their usual high line, Real Madrid were looking to be aggressive to find the pace of Mbappe and Vinicius, but Barcelona must be credited for their incredible offside line. But things weren't always perfect, however, because with the wingers pressing so narrow, down the right-hand side in particular, we saw Bellingham come extremely central, drawing in the fullback. So if the centre-backs were only concerned with Mbappe and Vinicius, we saw Bellingham look to be the third-man runner in behind. Alternatively, what it presented the opportunity for was passes into Vasquez, who was quick to push high up. So now he and Bellingham would have a 2 versus 1 against Balde, and we actually see this in the build-up to Mbappe's disallowed goal. So this pressing shape is something Flick might have to address as the season goes on. And this game was the story of close calls for Real Madrid, and on the offense they constantly almost broke the offside line. And Barcelona should be credited for the most part for playing a great line, although we mustn't forget that at times this line was breached, but Mbappe's finishing was wayward. At least when he was onside. A dominant scoreline from Barcelona. But for the tactical score, Flick only earns a 7, while Ancelotti gets a 5.5, as Real were in this game for long spells, but the bounce of the ball went Barca's direction every single time. But drop your ratings down below. And next, I have the perfect video for you. Check this one out examining the controversial tactics of perhaps Barcelona's greatest manager. Click on screen now.